Welcome to the second leadership series of 2022. We want to thank our sponsors, Craig Kelman and Associates, for their support to MA programs, and to all of you who are attending here today. I am Diane Crilly, MA Director at the Water Environment Federation, and manage programs like this for MA leaders. Today, we will further discussion on getting emerging leaders plugged in. For WEF and MAs to continue to grow, we need the engagement of new leaders from within our own organizations. So let's get started. At this time, I would like to introduce Efthail Venner, WEF President-elect, who will provide our opening message.
Thank you, Diane, and welcome everybody to our first session in the leadership series on getting emerging leaders plugged in. And that is really a topic that's near and dear to my heart, starting out in WEF as a student and young professional in a committee in the New England Water Environment Association. And it's certainly, I think, critical to WEF and our member associations that we get emerging leaders plugged into the organization and moving towards a path towards leadership, because it's really critical for the long-term sustainability of our organization. So just a little bit about my journey in WEF. As I said, I started out in the Students and Young Professionals Committee once I graduated out in New England. And I was there for a few years, really getting, moving up the chain in the SNYPC committee, engaged in the student design competition and so on. And then I moved to Florida, and my role had started to become more of a national role. I'm a wastewater process engineer by training. And I became involved in WEF in the Municipal Resource Recovery Design Committee and in sustainability, which was sort of more emerging at the time and something that I thought was some place where I could really make my mark. I then was encouraged by folks to, as I was progressing there, to try out for the chair of the sustainability community of practices at the time. And as a young professional, I thought, oh, I'm not ready for that. I'm certainly, maybe not as qualified as others and so on. And I think a lot of folks really took the time to really encourage me to do that. I was successful in that endeavor. And I took that and then became a community of practice director, and then onto the board that I've been on now, maybe for the last, 5 or 6 years, and which has been, with each step that I have participated in WEF has really, I think, advanced my leadership skills within WEF, but certainly within my organization. I strongly believe, as I'm sure many of you do, that I would not be where I am even in my career at Arcadis had it not be for my engagement in my member associations and also at WEF. And it's really allowed me to expand my network, as I said, learn a lot of skills, and I think provide a lot of impact. I think even more so than in my day job, I feel like some of the efforts that I do within WEF are able to make an impact in the water sector beyond just the projects that I work in. And today we'll hear from some of those emerging professionals who probably have the same thing. They're coming at the water sector from a different story, but they also, from a different place, but they also have a similar story of getting into WEF, getting into their member associations. Many of the more seasoned professionals, experienced professionals, really taking an interest in them, providing them with engagement opportunities, making them aware of them, and then the support to, as they move towards leadership, to really succeed in those leadership positions. And you'll hear a lot about the passion that they have for the organization, the passion that they have for what we do. So I think for all of us, because of that, we feel really strongly about giving back to those emerging professionals that are coming into the sector and coming into our organizations. And we have some best practices to share. And I'm sure all of you do too, as you've sort of engaged what has worked for you and what has worked for getting you plugged in, and what we're trying to get to. I think, as I said, all of us are really wanting to make sure that we continue that pipeline to leadership and getting engagement in our work that we do. How can we do better? So Casey will talk a little bit about the emerging leaders work group that's in the House and the work that they've been doing and how they have been getting feedback from young professionals as to what is working and what is not. And then we'll hear from 3 young professionals or emerging professionals, I will say, and some of them are, I would say that they're just leaders in the organization at this point about their journey in the organizations and what has worked for them and what are their suggestions. And then we'll move into our breakouts and hopefully expand upon those that we are hearing and what your experiences are, so that we can come up with some thoughts as to how we as member associations and WEF can continue to bring young professionals into what we're doing and moving them into leadership positions. So I'm really looking forward to what we have today, and I really appreciate that you're being here. And now I'll pass it off to Casey, who is from Casey Gish, who's a WEF delegate from PMCWA and also the chair of that emerging professionals work group that I mentioned in the House.
Yeah, thank you so much, Taya. Appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate you sharing your WEF story. We'll hear a few more of those today, and I think that just really gets at the heart of member engagement and acceptance, and really having people have a fulfilling experience with our organizations, whether it's MA or WEF. So as mentioned, my name is Casey Gish. I am an engineer with Brown & Caldwell in the Seattle office by day, and by night, I am the leader of the Emerging Professionals, the leader of the Emerging Professionals to Leadership Work Group with the House of Delegates. And I'll jump in a little bit here and talk about what that is. Let me try to share my screen. Let's see, I'm more of a Teams person, so I'm gonna fumble here for a minute. There we go. Okay, is everybody catching that? Look good. You can see that, Diane?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So the things I'll cover today is talk about the work that our House of Delegates work group is completing, that is trying to understand and promote the engagement of emerging leaders emerging professionals into leadership positions within WEF and our MA. And then I'll talk a little bit about really cool programs that some MAs are doing in developing their own leadership development opportunities within the organization, similar kind of to the WEF Water Leadership Institute. So this is a kind of a discussion. I would want to have less me just talking. If there are opportunities for folks to engage or ask questions, please jump in. You can either drop some information in the chat or just speak up. And if Diane, you could please monitor the chat. I think everybody's minimized, so I can't see exactly the chat box. So first, a quick high-level overview, and I think this is really important, the work we do. So I'm not using terms and language that folks aren't familiar with. Starting off, what is the House of Delegates? So basically, it's like a representative body of the Water Environment Federation. Each member association, or MA, which is a term you might hear me use, has 1 to 3 delegates depending on size. And those delegates form the House of Delegates, and that position within an MA serves as a conduit between the member association and the Water Environment Federation. So each year, the House of Delegates has a different speaker, and that speaker helps identify with the WEF president kind of goals for the year and what items the House of Delegates can work on as far as advancing and developing our organizations. And this year, the HOD speaker developed this Emerging Professionals to Leadership work group with the goal of identifying hurdles to emerging professionals engaging in leadership positions within our organizations, and how to kind of overcome those hurdles. So the next 2 slides are kind of an overview and the purpose of our work group. So as an overview, as we know, all our member associations, WEF, we rely on new leaders to join committees, the House of Delegates, membership board positions, the Board of Trustees, and other leadership opportunities. So the purpose of our work group is how do we continue to engage and grow and advance new leaders within our organization. So the first step to that is identifying the barriers that folks face when they're trying to enter new leadership roles. Can we create pathways to engage those people in new leadership positions? And how can we develop resources to educate existing members on ways that they can better engage emerging leaders? How can we develop resources to educate emerging leaders about opportunities to grow into? So it's kind of both sides of that coin there that are really critical pieces of this. So kind of what our work group is working towards, we kicked things off after WEFTech last year. Our work wraps up in October at WEFTech this year. Kind of the primary deliverable we're working towards is creating these kind of quote unquote roadmaps to leadership within MAs and WEF. And the idea is it's like a 1-page infographic that helps educate WEF staff members, MA staff, MA members on ways that they can develop and grow themselves into leaders within these organizations. And specifically, kind of a nuance of that is identifying the roles and the opportunities and the growth paths that somebody within our MA or WEF can follow. Sort of our key kind of target audience when we kicked off this work was the folks that are kind of rolling off the SYPC or the Emerging Leaders Committee, and kind of where can they go next in their journey with WEF or their MA. But we sort of broadened our scope a little bit with that, and we want to be more inclusive and think about folks that maybe have just been part of an MA or WEF for multiple years and they want to get engaged more, but they don't know how. Folks that maybe have been an engaged member and they want to know different areas that they can grow. So with that, the HOD speaker in our work group, when we defined our charter at the end of the last WEF Tech, we identified kind of 7 primary hurdles to engagement that we felt that members were facing in their advancement into leadership roles within the organization. So the 7 are listed on the slide here. Number 1 being, and these are in no particular order, but I will get to kind of how we've ordered and organized these over the course of our work. So things like the lack of awareness of opportunities for members of where they can grow or how they can develop, the lack of apparent support or invitation to join, that pull from our organizations for new members to be more engaged, lack of clear objectives and growth opportunities. So maybe I think these organizations can seem nebulous from the outside and you're not really sure where to go or how to get in. Lack of perceived value is one I think we could all understand, whether that's your employer or whether that's kind of a personal perspective of these organizations and sharing your time. Lack of resources to support the success of new leaders, whether that's mentorship or whether the resource is time. There could be a just general lack of resources and people's ability to grow. Cost of participation, that's a resource, is the money there, whether that's an employer or personnel doesn't have the support needed to engage from a financial perspective. And then 7 is something, and we'll hit on this one a little bit more later, but the need for existing leaders to embrace emerging professionals as leaders in the WEF community. And that's a really, really big one. I'll stop there for a minute. Does anybody have questions about what our work group does, what our goals are, or the 7 hurdles that we've identified here?
Garrett said, will this presentation be available for future thoughts and taking points to their MA?
We can make it available. Yeah, I'll send, maybe Diane, I don't know if you'll do minutes or send out notes after this call, but we can definitely make this available. Thank you for asking. So we identified these 7 hurdles at the onset of our work group, and then we kind of ranked them internally to identify sort of what we thought was the most critical, sort of to the least critical, and identify the top 2 and sort of unpack and define those a little further, and then develop the deliverables from our work based on the outcomes of that. So pretty quickly off, we realized that polling a House of Delegates group is a very select group of individuals that understands these organizations well and are highly engaged. We might have a bit of a biased perspective on what the hurdles to engagement are. So we spread our polling out. We polled the Emerging Leaders Summit at the WEF Utility Management Conference earlier this year. We polled the WEF Students and Young Professionals Committee. We polled the larger House of Delegates. And then we had a lot of discussions and polling and unpacking these ideas at WEF Max Charleston. So the first 4 bullet points there, when you rank these hurdles based on kind of the culmination of the surveys of those first 4 groups, we found that number 1, those groups felt that the lack of awareness of opportunities was the largest hurdle to engagement and growth into leadership roles within these organizations. Number 2 is the lack of apparent support or invitation to join. And then followed up a tie for number 3, lack of clear objectives and growth opportunities and cost of participation. So again, this is SNYP committee. This is folks at the Utility Management Emerging Leaders Conference. This is the WEF House of Delegates. This is kind of a relatively broad perspective, I think, of WEF members. So that was really good. We dug into these ideas a little bit deeper during WEF Max in Charleston about a month ago. And I think the results of that are really telling and really interesting. So there were about, I think, 80 folks at WEF Max Charleston, and maybe 50 or so responded to a poll that we gave during the in-person gathering. So of all attendees that responded to the poll during WEF Max, the number 1 perspective of the hurdle to engagement in growth into leadership positions is the lack of awareness of opportunities. So we talked about that as a group, thought about that idea, kind of unpacked it, sort of thought, what exactly does that mean? And then we identified, hey, maybe the folks that are responding to the poll, and most of the folks at WEF are a bit, again, of the most engaged, ingrained members of WEF, and maybe they have a skewed perspective. And we were lucky enough to have people that identified either as emerging leaders or underrepresented in some way within the WEF or their MA community. So we asked that smaller group, again, the emerging leaders or the underrepresented individuals, to respond to the poll and see what they thought was the kind of most, the greatest barrier to engagement and growth in our organizations. So interesting, what that group, that subgroup, emerging leaders and underrepresented people, felt was that the number one hurdle to engagement was the need for existing leaders to embrace emerging professionals as leaders in the WEF community. So I'll pause there for a minute and kind of think about this idea for a second. So folks that are growing into leadership positions, they are emerging leaders, they're not fully ingrained, or they're underrepresented in some way within WEF, felt that the greatest hurdle to engagement was the need for existing leaders to embrace them as professionals and leaders within the WEF community. The larger group, I think the most ingrained and up to speed and engaged members of WEF, kind of the sort of the typical member, felt like it's the lack of awareness of opportunities as to why folks are not growing into leadership positions or engaging beyond, say, the SYPC. So I see this as two perspectives of the same issue. The folks who are already leaders in our organizations feel that the up and coming group doesn't understand the awareness of opportunities of where they can grow, while the folks that are growing and up and coming feel that there's a need for existing leaders to embrace them as leaders within our organization. So it's just a very salient point, and I thought a very interesting concept that came out of our discussions at WEFMAX. Any questions on that? I have a couple more slides I want to cover here just to unpack some of those hurdles a little bit, but I want to give folks time to ask questions if anybody's curious about this work so far. Okay. I want to be conscious of time here because I have a lot to cover in the hour and a half, but the next two slides sort of unpack some additional work that we did at WEFMAX, where the two of the kind of primary hurdles that were identified outside of just that WEFMAX group, but kind of the larger polling that we had done, was the lack of awareness of opportunities and the lack of apparent support or invitation to join. So the first one here in the afternoon, the first day afternoon at WEFMAX, we sort of try to further define these hurdles and like put a fine point on what exactly is the issue, and then what are some potential solutions to removing this barrier. So for the lack of awareness of opportunities, it was seen that there's a lack of easy and available information. I think nobody would argue that there isn't enough information produced by WEF specifically, or even our member associations, but it's the lack of easy and available information of knowing where somebody could continue to grow in their journey with our organizations. And kind of on a similar note, a lack of clarity when communicating. So what I heard here was there's a lack of awareness of opportunities because there isn't a clearly defined, or it's not clear. There's almost too much information. There isn't clarity, and there isn't refinement of or targeting with information shared with our organizations. Potential solutions to that: targeted messaging, micro volunteering, so kind of pulling off small pieces of ways people can engage without kind of overwhelming them or using too much of their time. Identifying champions to communicate opportunities, and then maybe formal info sessions or webinars where we can welcome in new members to a safe space to kind of learn about our organizations. So another hurdle to engagement that we felt or have found was seen as a priority was the lack of apparent support or invitation to join. And putting a more fine point on this hurdle, something we heard over and over was that employers don't always see the value in engagement in these organizations. There can be a bias on age, skills, and et cetera of existing leaders or people that want to grow into these organizations kind of feel that there is a bias or preference in some way that they're experiencing. And kind of on a similar note, intimidation and fear. So this is more on those that want to get engaged, kind of were expressing that they're intimidated or there's organizations can have an intimidating environment and not always be welcoming. So some solutions there that were brainstormed, mentor-mentee programs. I know at WEF and a lot of member associations already have those, so those seem to be a very effective tool. Defining purpose or reason to join, that's bullet number 2 at the bottom there, similar to bullet number 3, or a clearly defined return on investment. So really kind of helping people understand what they have to gain from engagement with these organizations. Inclusive environment, that's certainly one of the most critical things. It speaks a little bit to that bias that some emerging leaders have felt towards our organizations, and then a clear path for emerging leaders to grow into leadership positions. So a lot of information there, but what are ultimately working towards the end is this one-page infographic that sort of helps WEF and MAs and members digest and understand ways that they can help amend these hurdles to engagement that members are potentially experiencing in their organizations. Do folks have questions about that information before I get into my last couple slides here? Okay. So a piece of this that was presented, this is something else that's coming out of WEF Max that is directly correlated to some of these hurdles, and I think a really interesting approach to empowering members within different MAs. So if folks are familiar with WEF's Water Leadership Institute, it's I personally have not been through it, but it's a program WEF has developed to educate and empower and connect water professionals as they grow into leadership roles within our industry. So during WEF Max in Charleston, 3 different member associations actually presented on different leadership academies that they have developed specifically for their MA. I was personally very, very blown away and impressed by these MAs and what they had put together. And during the 3 presentations, they could only really speak positively about the outcomes of having developed programs like this within their member associations. And perhaps if somebody is not able to develop or have the time or resources to engage in WEF's Water Leadership Institute, there is opportunities within these specific MAs. And I don't want to dig in too much of this because our MA does not have one of these. I don't want to speak for these specific MAs in the programs that they've developed, but I can kind of say 2 things. One is that the individual websites for these specific MAs have published information about their programs that folks are interested in learning more. You should look them up. And then in addition, if you Google WEF Max, and then you go to the WEF Max library tab on the WEF website, you can download 3 presentations that were presented at WEF Max that talk about the details of these leadership academies that the MAs have put together. And they can talk through the financials, the enrollment, the program materials. It's a wealth of information. So if this is something that your MA is curious about exploring and wants to look more into, there's information on the WEF website, specifically the WEF Max library, where you can touch base with different MAs or learn from different MAs that have put these programs together. And I believe there's probably contact information in those presentations if you want to reach out to folks to learn more. So that was a little bit of a shotgun, but kind of springboarding off of this last topic, we're going to roll into a poll now. And the poll question is whether your MA has a leadership institute or academy. So I presented 3 different MAs as well as WEF that have these established leadership opportunities or growth opportunities. And we're curious whether there are other MAs in the group that also have similar programs. So folks should see a poll pop up. And please take a minute or 2 to answer that. Maybe we'll maybe let the poll hang for a minute or so. Is there anybody on the call that is a member of Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, or South Carolina that could speak a little bit about their Water Leadership Institute? Doesn't sound like we have members, but if folks then are again interested, please dig into some of the material that's on that WEF Max website. It's really insightful to how cool these programs can be. All right, so it looks like the results are in. 25% of the folks on this call, their MA does have a Leadership Institute, Academy, or similar venue. 72% is no, and 3% is under consideration. Interesting. Any thoughts from that 25% of folks that are on the call that have these programs engaged, and maybe how that has helped empower new members or member engagement within your MA?
Casey, this is Dylan. We, in Texas with WHEAT, we have a leadership summit. So not as involved as an institute, but what that lets us do in Texas being a big state is move it around the state each year and give local folks we talked about the financials, an easy opportunity to come and get in the room with our emerging leaders, past leaders, and it's a lot of fun, first of all, but it seems like it's been a nice entry point to make some familiar faces for broader engagement. So I like the fact that it moves around, because I think it helps us with or maybe underrepresented sections that have smaller membership and ability to get to a summit in a big city venue.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, that there's a lot of ways kind of to shape something like this. It doesn't necessarily have to be an established kind of academic style program, but it can be a gathering or a summit also that achieves the same goals.
And Casey, Ken Voigt just shared that North Carolina has Academy dealing with leadership soft skills. Okay,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was interesting. I think a takeaway or consistency in a lot of the presentations that were given at WEFMAX was it is those soft skills that are the focus of these academies. You know, a lot of us come from more technical backgrounds or engaged in our industry in one technical manner or another. So those soft skills don't always get developed, and this is a really cool opportunity to do that. So, okay, well, that's the information I have to present. I'm looking forward to the next section of this discussion, which is going to be sharing some Wefts stories from different members. And with that, I will hand the discussion over to Zach, who will be sharing his Wefts stories and experience as a student that has entered our industry and entered our MA and industry. And Zach, I don't have your bio in front of me, so I would encourage you and welcome you to kick things off with an introduction of yourself.
Okay, yeah, sure. Thank you, Casey. So to start off, my name's Zachary Loeb. I graduated in 2020 from the University of Central Florida. Go Knights. And I currently work at Clay County Utility Authority. I've been working here about 1.5 years now, a little bit less, so kind of right out of school. Basically, I'm going to kind of walk everybody through my WF journey and how I got to where I am today and everything I'm involved in, and kind of the return on investment, the ROI that Wefts is getting from investing in students. So I first became involved with WF and Florida Water Environmental Association in high school through the science fairs. Judges from different chapters would come and they would judge science fairs and meet students and become involved in network. And through that, I met all kinds of different people that were willing to support and encourage my research. For example, Jackie Torbert at Orange County Utilities. She let me use their laboratory and allowed me to collect effluent to do some of the experiments I wanted. And in doing so, really empowered me to do some really awesome research. So I'm really grateful to her, and that's kind of just one step in my WF Water Environmental Federation journey. So another big part of my journey was the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, and that's a water paper contest that basically every state participates in, and then every state sends one representative in, and then they sends a representative to nationals, and then one national winner gets to go to Sweden, and it's really cool, amazing experience. Through the Stockholm Junior Water Prize, I was the first runner-up in that, and I cannot talk about what an amazing experience that was. I was the winner from Florida for 2 years. First year was in Oregon, made all kinds of amazing networking opportunities, got to see tours and advanced technology. And then the second one was in DC, and that was just absolutely amazing too, to go to DC and again, meet a lot of these industry professionals. So one thing that came out of that, as being a winner of the state of Florida, they published me in the Florida Water Research Journal. And that opened up a ton of doors and opportunities for me as a student, applying to colleges and internships and all these different things. Being able to, have that article in the journal really, made people go, well, wait a minute, let's find out more about this kid and, what he's interested in. So that made a huge difference. Pretty much right after that happened, I was contacted by Frank Wright. He was the head of the Stockholm Junior Water Prize at the time, and I had a good relationship with him from being involved in that as a student participant. And he reached out to me once I became a college student and said, hey, we'd like you to come on as one of our judges. So I was super excited and honored to give back to an organization that opened up, in a contest opened up so many doors for me. So I said, absolutely, no problem. So for the past, 7 years now I've been a judge for the Stockholm Junior Water Prize. I've also been kind of the liaison between the professional academia side to those high school students coming up and telling them what to expect and, how they can present, stuff like that. So I was involved in that for about 7 years. And as of this year, I've taken over as the head of the project in the state of Florida, and brought some of my experiences onto that. And we had double participation this year, a big increase in quality of the papers we got. So it's been a real adventure, and I could talk about that for, an hour. But yeah, that was something that was very big for me. Another step in college was the student design contest, and that was through our young professionals. I believe that's put on for our young professionals through our FWA WEF partnership. But I was the winner. I think I was the only winner in our state's history to be a team of one. But I won, and then I went on to the national competition, and they sent me to Wefts Tech, and I got to see how amazing that was. Matter of fact, that's where I got this polo. Was at Wefts when I went there for the student design competition. Now in my everyday work life, I'm working side by side with consultants that were my judges or my coordinators for when I was a student in the student design competition. And they recognized me, and they're like, oh my gosh, we remember you when you won. And it's just the networking that came from that now has proved invaluable. I mean, every single day I'm working on projects and stuff with people that I met through that were, my judges and people coordinating the contest. As of this year, I actually was asked to come on as a judge for the student design competition. So I said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. I went to the Florida Water Resources Conference, and I judged for that in the wastewater category, or in the environmental category. Absolutely can't talk enough about that. Really amazing experience. And they also, through that same committee, brought me on as one of the panelist speakers in the YP Symposium, and talking about different, kind of similar to this, but different professionals in different sections of their life, and what they recommend and what worked. What I can really say out of that is that, a lot of these opportunities elevated me, and they gave me that stepping stone to move forward. And they gave me the opportunity to say, hey, are you interested in doing this? And, I got so much out of it. I'm just excited to give back and participate in that. And now even locally, I'm the member coordinator for our first Coast chapter. We have really great engagement. Yanni and Dave Rasmussen there, they do a great job putting on events. We have our fishing charter tournament coming up. I'm so excited that I'm going to bring my dad to that, like a late Father's Day present. But yeah, I can keep going on and on, and I don't want to eat up everybody's time. But there are these opportunities that present themselves to students, and I had those leaders reach out to me throughout as I'm advancing through my career to let me, participate and give back. And I think that is continuing to make a difference. And everything going on in my life today. And I'm absolutely blessed to be here and talk to you guys.
Awesome, Zach, thank you. I think that's such a great way to kick off a WEF story with somebody that's entering earlier in their career. And honestly, when I hear that, I think about, again, these hurdles that we've identified. One of the ones that emerging leaders and underrepresented groups said was the need for existing leaders to embrace emerging professionals as leaders in the WEF community. And I can't think of a better example of that than what Zach's described and how he was pulled into these organizations and given those opportunities. So I think that's something we all take away of something we personally can do to help enhance others' experiences. So with that, we'll hear our next story from Dylan Christensen. And Dylan, you can kick off with your introduction and then take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Casey. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. I appreciate Infantile sharing at the beginning of, a leadership opportunity and saying, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I think in the emerging leader hat that we often find ourselves maybe surprised by, oh, it's time for me to speak on a webinar about emerging leaders. Wow, I didn't realize I was here, or these type of things. And I'd really encourage the group, those of you that are connected in any capacity within your MAs or with WEF, even if we feel like, oh, I'm still emerging, I have a lot of space to grow, we serve as a critical bridge to reach back and pull others in and invite others in. And I think that's the overarching theme of my story is so many folks just were a friendly face in a room, or literally Joni Holly, if you know her, she's a force of nature, literally grabbed me by the shirt collar, I think, and dragged me across the room to meet someone else and connect me in an initiative. So when I say pulled in, I mean literally in some ways. But my background, if you can't tell by the receding hair, I'm an older emerging professional and spent some time as a high school teacher before doing some wonderful volunteer development work with my wife and I around the globe that captivated me with water. So I came into our industry with an older, young at heart, always young in industry experience and maybe a little older in years. And it was interesting to me. I'd been involved as a student, but at Texas Tech University, which, if you know Texas geography, is way out in the boonies. And so I was very unaware of some of the structures of WEF, how WEF worked, even exactly how the MA of the Water Environment Association, or WEAT, worked. But I was privileged to be able to be involved in the Springboard program. If you get a chance to do that, I highly encourage that. If you have young professionals that you work with and they have a chance, please, it's a wonderful program. And really what it did for me is it provided me a piece of my water family, a friendly set of faces. And some of those folks are on the call today. And just when I showed up at WEFTech that next year, as I walked around totally overwhelmed, I saw smiles all the time, either in a session or in the hallway going by. And it really created the encouragement I needed to be comfortable in a really, to be honest, overwhelming space, and gave me confidence in a committee meeting to say, hey, I'll raise my hand and say, I'd like to be a part of that. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to reflect on. And Casey, the hurdles y'all came up, I love that slide. I think once you're connected in WEF, it really, I believe this, I say it, it sounds maybe cheesy, but to me it's true. It is a water family, and we become so connected to each other on personal levels, and we really care, but we develop this knowledge of the WEF structure, this deep personal connections with each other, which is a really great thing. The challenge can be for someone that's brand new, they don't know any of the lingo and they are not as connected. And even our, inside jokes, or how about so and so, and it's just things they don't know, can be intimidating to someone that's brand new. So I really think it's something we need to reflect on, is, are we always being intentional to turn outward and invite people in? And so that's a big piece of my story, and just something that I'm passionate about encouraging, is how can we plug others in, even if we don't know exactly the path forward. Sometimes just saying, hey, I don't know how to get involved here either, but let's not know together, and I'll walk with you up to chat with so-and-so. And just knowing, because we know that there's a friendly face or there's a friendly answer at the end of that because of the Wefts family, even if we don't know the leader at the front of the room, we know that the end result will be positive. So that's a bit of my encouragement to the group. And I would just say that, as someone that I love people, but I think, my energy, I'm an introvert, and so the big rooms, the WEFTech, these things are MA mixers, all those are a lot of fun. But it's amazing when you have someone that knows you and just waves at you or smiles or brings you over. So for those, as you're connected, I would say you never go wrong to smile at someone, wave at someone, walk over and say, hey, I don't know you yet. And maybe they're not new, maybe you just haven't met them, but it's a really important piece, the human side of connecting. The other piece, I think I've made it clear, but what really gets me excited and gets me up in the morning is my water family. The complex challenges of our industry, when we work on them individually in our professional hats, that's great. It's a lot of fun. But when we do it as a big group, that's, I think, where we make, Infantile pointed out, like, we really can make some differences when we come together across the country, across the globe, across organizations. So that's, if you're looking at getting involved in WEF, I think that's a huge value, is that the level of conversations and the level of impact we can have really gets magnified when you bring these diverse teams of people together. And that's what WEF is able to do in the MAs. I think, one other bit I would say from my story is having frequent opportunities to bring people together is really important, because in trying to plug in as an emerging leader, when you don't know the structure, sometimes it's just not clear how you could even get there to plug in. So if you're a leader in your organization, have lots of different vehicles and opportunities to connect. Happy hours, mixers, plant tours, do it all, because you never know. You cast a broad net. You never know when someone's time, schedule, and interest is going to align to have them come in and make that connection. So I think, Casey knows I like to ramble and go on and on. But I think those are the core ideas I'd like to say. And the other piece, that if there's anybody and you have questions, I know in a webinar, sometimes it can be challenging to get those out. Please follow up with any of us. I can confidently commit anyone that you see speak today would love to get you plugged in where you are, and count me included. So if there's any way I can support you and help you, please don't be shy. Send the email, send the message, follow up with any of us. You have a lot to offer. Your MA, your community, even your local section, all those pieces, you have something really valuable to us, and we'd love to get you plugged in and empowered to grow.
Awesome. Thank you, Dylan. Appreciate your input there. And I would second the way you advocated for our Springboard program. I also was in that program, and I actually was able to meet Vanessa and Dylan through that. So it's a really great way to connect the WEF community. So last but not least here, we have Vanessa Borkowski, who's going to share her perspective of engaging with our organizations from the young professionals' perspective in this industry, and kind of growing there and growing beyond that. So with that, I'll hand it over to Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Vanessa Borkowski. I sit in Hartford, Connecticut, work at Stantec as a senior civil engineer. And as Casey and others have mentioned, the benefits of being connected with people, the folks on this call, the speakers, the attendees, that's all so important and a very critical part of my story, because my story is about how the connections that I've made through my MA, through WEF at the national level, have landed me in my current role. So, and one thing I also wanted to mention was that all of the leaders that I've met through these different experiences, they've all been so helpful and humble, as Dylan was saying. It's just an ask, and they're willing to help you figure out what to do and how to get connected with the right people. But in terms of my story, I started volunteering at the MA level in my home state of Arizona while completing my master's degree. So I got connected as a student, and I found that showing up was half the battle. At that point in my career and experience, I showed up at my MA and found a mentor who connected me with more people. I ended up getting involved with the YP Summit, which was a collaborative event, and is a collaborative event between AWWA and Wefts, and ended up volunteering, saying yes to this opportunity and yes to that opportunity. And, it just seemed like there were all of these different activities where I could help develop my, career and skills with, professional development, making sure that I, was also refining my technical skills at the same time. And eventually I landed with the Students and Young Professionals Committee for Wefts, and served as a leader there, where, we run a bunch of different programs between the service project and student design competition, springboard program, just to name a few. But, through that experience was able to challenge my own leadership style and skills, but also served as an advocate for YPs within Wefts, making sure that people saw SYPC as a stepping stone to people's next phase of their volunteer career within Wefts, because what we're hoping is that people don't stay in SYPC forever. So, Springboard is one tool that we use to do that. That's the program that Dylan and others have mentioned. And it really does celebrate YPs. Historically, pre-COVID, folks were attending the mid-year meetings where technical committees and the West Tech Program Committee get together. And at those committee meetings, the YPs are acknowledged, they're pulled in, and that's great, because they're really getting integrated into the fabric of our volunteer community. And one thing I would challenge folks to think through is, not only recognizing and pulling in the YPs, but also elevating them, helping them grow into other opportunities. Because one thing that I found as well, after my SYPC leadership tenure concluded, I was having a hard time figuring out what my next step was, because it's not as though, folks didn't need me in certain areas, but, I wanted to figure out what my next step was on my own. And I wanted to be asked to do more than serve on the YP subcommittee of a technical committee. So I was really craving something a little bit different. And, I didn't have someone charter that next opportunity for me. I've actually had a couple of things come up and have set the intention for myself to follow a certain path, and trying to figure out how to navigate that, and I'm having better success with some West mentors as well. So that's something that doesn't go away no matter where you end up, and how much experience you have. It seems like there's always someone who can help you figure out what your next step is as well. And like others were saying on the call, it's something that we're moving upwards in our career, and we are also having that need to pull others up with us, because it's not only a matter of succession planning, but it's good practice, and for teaching teams, teaching others, whether it's technical skills, emotional intelligence, or otherwise. So I've really had a positive experience from that respect, figuring out what my next step was. So currently, I am on the Plant Operations and Maintenance Committee. I'm a vice chair of one of the subcommittees, and have joined the Residual and Biosolids Committee to kind of exercise that technical skill set, and also explore that interest area. And from a leadership perspective, I'm serving as the Community of Practice Director for Outreach and Innovation. So I have 5 committees that report up to me, which include the Government Affairs Committee, Membership, Technical Practices, Research and Innovation, and Public Communications. So I am, the leader that reaches out to the committee leadership there, make sure they have everything they need, and also help them resolve conflict, help them, figure out what the next steps are for the committee, help them with the strategic part of leading a committee as well. So those are all skills that I've grown over time through my different volunteerism with Wefts, and I've been really fortunate to have all of those opportunities and have support from my employer as well. So it's one of those things where it felt like it was a lot of saying yes at first, having all of these opportunities available, and now I think I'm a little more intentional about what I want to accomplish, and so that means making space for others to take on some of those other opportunities and kind of pursuing a certain direction of my own. So I think part of this as well is making sure that folks are being the change that they really want to see in the water world. So a lot of my experience, I think, has led me to this point where I finally feel a little more certain about my direction, but it's taken a long time to get there. A lot of introspective thoughts, and then also just talking through the approach with others. So I think overall we in the water community are all here building up this strong foundation of water leaders for our future, and I'm happy to be a part of that.
Awesome, Vanessa. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your story and your journey there, and then ways that you found beyond the SYPC to really engage and grow yourself personally, professionally, and grow your network. So thank you. The next activity we have is going to be a breakout discussion, but we made a little space in the agenda to ask questions to either Zach, Dylan, or Vanessa. Does anybody in attendance today have any questions for our presenters? Feel free to throw something in the chat or just on mute and jump into the conversation. All right, doesn't look like anybody's got anything on the tip of their tongue there. I'm sure the individuals will be happy if you reach out to them afterwards if you do have any specific questions. And again, I want to thank the three of you for sharing your WEF stories. I know hearing other people's journeys within our organization, I find that very rewarding, and it helps me grow my understanding of what these what WEF can be. I've heard WEF described as kind of that old analogy of different people touching different parts of an elephant. Nobody can really describe what it is. So really like hearing other people's stories and what their perspectives of our organization are. So looks like a good transition point into our breakout discussion. So in the agenda, we've identified 2 questions that we'd like the breakout groups to kind of unpack. We have about 20 minutes for these small group discussions. The first point is, what practices have worked well for growth for you, for your growth into leadership? And then what's one thing WEF can change to empower emerging leaders? So really dig deep for that last one. You really want folks to come back with, if WEF can do one thing to change in order to do a better job at empowering emerging leaders, what would that thing be? Somebody please volunteer in your small groups to jot down some notes. We're going to ask folks to report out afterwards and have a small discussion there about some of the findings and the results of the discussion. And with that, I think we will head out to the breakout groups. Diane, is that?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to actually pause the recording.
Ready? So we have about 15 minutes or so left. We're going to do a short report out here for what folks determined and discussed in the breakout room. Then we'll kind of talk about what did we learn today? What are some kind of final follow-up thoughts? And then we have a closing from Ifatayo. So with that, please post what you some follow-up ideas in the video chat. What practices have worked well for folks in your breakout room in their growth into leadership within WEF or their MA? And then this is a really big one. If you're going to answer just one of them, answer this one. What's one thing that WEF can change to empower emerging leaders? So getting some good notes here. And these notes will be summarized and recapped and sent out to the group after today's call, but want to leave some room here for discussion. So let's see. We got something from Shelby here. I think Shelby maybe posted that, or excuse me, posted to the group. So one thing that WEF can change to empower emerging leaders. focused emails on how to get involved in committees, more outreach through social media, emails, and MA leaders, utilizing Wefts delegate that represent MAs, and then more time to network at conferences. Those are awesome ideas. Let's see some other things that WEF can change to empower new leaders. Bridging gaps, that's the SYPC group acts as a, bridging the gaps, the SYPC group acts as a bridge group before entering the more technical committee groups within WEF. Getting rid of an old WEF mindset that being, you're young, in your YP, you don't have technical experience, you can do certain things. I guess growing out of that mindset to encourage YPs to become more involved in their MAs or their within WEF. So empowering those emerging leaders into leadership roles. Change the good old boy network. I think that's something, that inclusivity that we've seen or can be experienced in these organizations, getting rid of that. Zach jumped in with engaging in local and state science fairs, really good thoughts there and definitely pertinent to your experience and how others can get involved. We had a similar thought in our breakout room to engage past scholarship recipients, past folks like Zach that have been recognized for other awards to carry that forward. Any thoughts here? Maybe I'll open it up for a minute. Diane's not going to curse me for doing this, but just open the floor for a minute for thoughts that people had from their breakout room. Anybody have any standout thoughts or discussion topics that were covered?
I guess I'll jump in. John Cosa, Chesapeake Water Environment Association. We had a very engaging conversation. And one of the things that I know Chesapeake has done is undertake a strategic plan update. And as part of that, recognize, and we did use resources from WEF. Brad and Kelsey came out and led a day-long session. We had already been holding meetings, creating SWOT analysis, running through the typical strategic planning process, and got valuable input from WEF. But what I recognized is as we started hearing about the 7 hurdles and going over some of the ways to address those, I was reminded how many of those things I was able to check mark and say, yeah, that's covered with a strategic planning update. It's creating opportunities within our organization for emerging leaders to step up as initiatives are created. We're just at that part of the process. And so that's where I'm looking, given that our current leaders, it's kind of the 80-20 rule, 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And we need to have more resources and support, and those opportunities, especially if they're coming from emerging leaders and some of their ideas and guidance about where they would like to see the association head. I think that bodes well. That could be one of the vehicles to engaging emerging leaders.
So that what I'm hearing is just a kind of a refresh of your organizational structure, your organizational goals, how you're engaging members. Is it aligned with maybe the direction of the industry and kind of where the organization wants to go? You're not just maintaining status quo.
Exactly. And that's important for any organization to do periodically. And that's going to mean a mission, vision, goals, and everything that cascades from there.
Yep.
And because of that dynamic of the 80-20 rule, it's an opportunity that's going to be created for individuals to step forth and help lead some of these initiatives that are going to be high visibility.
Yep.
The usual pathway for emerging leaders is join a committee, and then you could be vice chair, and then chair, and then maybe trustee over a bunch of committees. And that's a great pathway, and it works. But this is another pathway that I think is quite effective. I'm very optimistic in how it's going to shake out for us.
Yeah, thank you. Any additional thoughts on that, or any other thoughts from the breakout room discussions? Looks like Rosaline had her hand up.
Yeah, I had it wasn't something we talked about in our breakout, but it was something that our MA's actually been talking about, is that one of our big ways of socializing traditionally has been with a whole bunch of golf tournaments, and that the whole bunch of golf tournaments traditionally have created really horrible gender dynamics of a whole bunch of older white drunk men and a single woman out on a golf course with for hours on end, and it is not inviting, and it also creates issues of having to have this barrier to entry that doesn't need to be there, of either of buying golf clubs and either accepting that you're not going to do well, or having to practice and get a membership, and all of this that has nothing to do with operating a treatment facility or a collection system and obtaining financing and doing our jobs. And that, and the alcohol in general also creates issues at times. So being aware of how we're socializing and how this can create barriers to networking through our networking opportunities has been a big discussion at NIWEA. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that to the discussion.
Absolutely, thank you. I think that's that example speaks to a lot there, and I saw a lot of nodding heads in the audience. So we're going to shift here soon into a closing, but we have a minute or so left for discussion. Any other ideas anybody from the group wants to share? Thank you for those who have jumped into the conversation.
ACR group talked about, the underrepresented groups, whether that's in smaller sections or operators, their voices are the quietest, and often they don't even have an advocate or some connectivity back to the core, the main group, to get their needs out there. And the thing that WEF can do is be really intentional about reaching out, but also the financial resources and other resources are just limited in those sections. So it really takes some significant investment to get out there, and it's a challenge, but that was something we talked quite a bit about with different lenses, is how do we support those sections that are underrepresented, those groups that are underrepresented. And I know WEF has done some tremendous work on that, but I think it's a big enough problem we have to keep pushing to work on it.
Absolutely. Additional thoughts from the group? So as we go into the closing, if folks from breakout rooms have not posted some of their follow-up thoughts and ideas to the chat, please do so. Again, I believe that information is going to be kind of distilled down and then redistributed after this call for folks to review. All right, well, I think with that, I'll hand it over to Fatayo for a closeout. Thank you everybody for who's engaged today and joining this conversation. Really appreciate all of the dialogue.
Right, thanks, Casey. Yeah, this has been really great. This is actually the second call I've been in today. I spent this morning in a think tank within Arcadis about how do we have our employee value proposition and what is it that makes folks want to stay here and what folks want to leave. And so it's a fairly similar discussion towards what we've been having. And I really liked all the stories that I heard, and what came out and sort of I'm seeing in the comments and what kind of our discussion in our breakout group went was this concept of folks being tapped and encouraged along the way, which I think is really important, and certainly a large part of the reason why I am where I am within WEF and certainly within my organization. But then, looking at the comments here, hearing what Rosaline had to say and what we had talked about was that tapping. It assumes that you know someone and you've already created that connection, and that's really, it's very sort of maybe a narrower band. And what we sort of focused on was how can we maybe create that environment, however that is, that it is a little bit more, it's more inclusive, and create more opportunities for those connections to happen for more people, so that they can all sort of be brought into the fray and recognize what a great organization it is. So that's certainly something for us to think about, as how we can be more intentional about that. How can we be more strategic and proactive, while still sort of keeping the benefit of this tapping that's going on, but it's just more broadly available to more folks than just sort of these one-off connections that are happening. And then how can we sustain that and train up the leaders, providing that environment for them to want to stay as they move forward. So that's certainly something we're thinking about, and it's really important to me as we're moving forward, and I'm sure many of you, or you would not be here. So again, as you're going back, really, you know, as I said, thinking about that, and I really appreciate everyone's time and participation, and we'll be going through, I know Diane, I still have to send you my notes. I will email you them from my group, but looking through all that is in here and seeing how we can make this organization better, and the work that we do better, because it's important. And thank you for all that you do for Wefts and for water. So. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope you have a great week and a safe holiday, everyone.
Happy 4th, everyone.